Well, good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. And today commemorates the 103rd anniversary of the Battle of Fromelles. My name is Richard Cruz, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Navy is Chief Petty Officer David Osborne. 103 years ago today, Major Geoffrey Gordon McRae of Hawthorn, Victoria, wrote his last letter home before leading the 60th Battalion in the assault at Fromelles. In it, he noted, "Today I lead my battalion in an assault on the German lines, and I pray God that I may come through all right and bring honour to our name. If not, I will at least have laid down my life for you and my country, which is the greatest privilege one can ask for. Farewell, dear people, the hour approacheth." Hours later, McRae was dead, one of 5,533 Australian dead, wounded and missing. He was 26 years old. The British suffered 1,547 casualties and the Germans 1,653. It was the darkest day in Australia's military history. Realising the significance of Fromelles to our young nation, the memorial's founder, Charles Bean, returned to walk over the ground on the day of the armistice in 1918 to think, reflect and record before the battlefield returned to peace. We found the old no man's land simply full of our dead. The skulls and bones and torn uniforms were lying about everywhere. He described Fromelles as one of the bravest and most hopeless assaults ever undertaken by the AIF. On that site today at VC Corner is the only Australian cemetery without headstones and epitaphs. A stone wall sits in the middle of the former no man's land, inscribed with the names of 1,299 Australians with no known graves. Today we will hear the story of Private Charles James Moore, who is commemorated at VC Corner, and we warmly welcome his family who are joining us this evening. We're honoured to welcome Mr John King, President, ACT Branch of the Returned and Services League of Australia. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. We acknowledge the members of RSL and Services Clubs Association, RSL Victoria and RSL Queensland, who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by family and visitors to the memorial. Australia's Federation Guard is a tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catapult party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier within the Hall of Memory. If you're able, I invite you all to please stand and join in singing the National Anthem, which will be led this evening by the Aussie Youth Choir honouring All Defence Service. If you're able, please be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn their loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 102,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations for more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths and floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the Pool of Reflection.
Today we remember and pay tribute to Corporal Charles James Moore. Charles Moore was born in 1893 in the city suburb of Newtown, the fourth of 6 children born to William and Bessie Moore. In 1900, his father and his infant sister died within 2 weeks of each other. In the wake of this double tragedy, his mother lacked the means to care for all of her children. So the 4 boys were raised separately. The family managed to stay in touch with one another, and Charles attended Chatswood Public School. As a young man, Charles, known as Charlie, worked as a salesman in Sargood's Brothers warehouse in Sydney. He was living with his mother at Amerton when he enlisted in the Australian Imperial Force at the age of 21. Charles Moore enlisted soon after news of Gallipoli landings reached Australia. After some initial training in New South Wales, he sailed to the Australian Army camp in Egypt, where he completed further training. In early November 1915, he joined the 1st Battalion on Gallipoli. Moore's letters home from Gallipoli show how he adapted to the realities of trench warfare. He wrote to his brother, "You hear a shell coming and someone will sing out, and down we all go. Then once again, resume your work as if nothing had happened. The first few days scared the hell out of me, but I'm used to it now." On the 4th of December, he had a near miss when a bullet grazed his head, but he was back in action the very next day. By the end of that month, the Imperial forces had withdrawn from Gallipoli Peninsula. As a result, Moore was back in Egypt by the end of the year. In early 1916, Moore began training at the School of Instruction at Zaytun outside Cairo. Here he learned how to use a machine gun, and in March he was transferred to the 14th Machine Gun Company. He then sailed with this company to France to join the major British offensive on the Western Front. The 14th Australian Infantry Brigade, to which Moore's company was attached, marched to the north of France, near the town of Fromelles. To the south, Allied forces were conducting a major offensive along the Somme River section of the Western Front. The role of the 14th Brigade in this campaign was to create a diversion and pin German forces at Fromelles, preventing them from moving south and reinforcing their defences along the Somme. On the 19th of July 1916, Australia and other Allied troops went over the top into no man's land. An early artillery bombardment of the German lines had failed to break the German defences, and the Australian troops came under heavy machine gun fire for the so-called Sugarloaf salient. British and Australian forces did manage to capture sections of German trenches, but were confronted by a counterattack during the night. By the next morning, the 14th Infantry Brigade had been ordered to withdraw. On that day, the 20th of July 1916, Charles Moore was killed in action. He was one of almost 2,000 Australian killed on a single night of fighting. In terms of lives lost, the battle represents the worst 24 hours in Australian military history. Charles' remains were never identified. He is one of over 10,000 Australian soldiers commemorated at Villers-Bretonneux Memorial in France. Corporal Charles James Moore is listed on the Roll of Honour to my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. Now we remember Corporal Charles James Moore, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
Catapult party, shoulder up!
If you're able, please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
Old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
We will remember them.
Catapult Party presents Catapult Party shoulder arms.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Catapult Party in words. Turn. Catapult Party quick march.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes this evening's last post ceremony. We thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial and wish you all a very good evening. Thank you.